Dawson. I'm the chair of the Adult Christian Formation Committee, and we have a committee member here today, David and Angie, so thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Eugenia. I rang the bell once, but very few people came, so we've got Eugenia now, making it happen. Faith Cafe is a time for adults in our church, and really anyone who wants to join, to go a little bit deeper around discipleship. And we've defined discipleship as the intentional process of following Christ's words and deeds to become like Christ, to draw others to Christ, and to transform the world. And the way we pursue this during this time is to study some of these topics down at the bottom that can help us be more intentional with understanding who God is and who we are because of that and what that means for us in the world. So today we have Angie Dickens and Laura Andrews coming to talk about the spiritual discipline of faith sharing. And so I said last week that it's not going to be the 4 spiritual laws, but it's going to be more of how does this come out in your day-to-day life, and what is that? How do you kind of plan to be bold in being who you are as a Christian or as a Christ follower? So I will pass it over to them now.
Thanks. I wanted to start just by introducing ourselves a little bit, and then Laura's going to hand it to Laura. Who's going to start us off? I'm Angie Dickens. I'm a member of the church. I was thinking last night, and I think I've been attending for about 4.5 years and been a member for 3.5 years, something like that. And I'm active in second service. I play music there, I play flute in the band, co-leader of the group Refuge with Mary Strait, and on the Adult Christian Formation Committee.
I'm Laura Andrews. I am also active in the second service, and I help lead worship, so you might see me during summer or combined services. I am an elder and also the chair of the Connections Commission, which I'll talk a little bit about how that lives into sharing my faith. Also, I've been a member here for, oh my goodness, maybe 2 years, but I was going here as a visitor for like 3. So it was quite a joke when I joined, and I also live just across the street, or Katie corner, wherever you come from, and however you say that. But we're going to go ahead and get started with some scripture. So I'm just going to read this to you guys, and I would encourage you to maybe just don't read along with me, just close your eyes and listen. Listen to it, and just take a moment as I'm reading it to let it kind of resonate with you, and then we're going to talk about some of it. Matthew 5:13 through 16. Let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house, be generous with your lives by opening up to others. You'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. What I love about this scripture, and this version comes from the Message. What I love about this is it is as if somebody is talking in your ear, telling you, you are here. You are here to be seasoning. You're here to be light to people who need to see the light. So next one I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about my story and my faith sharing, and hopefully that'll encourage you to think about some things, and we'll have a time for you to respond in a little bit. I'm going to open up my notes. Okay, so I grew up in church. My father was in the Army, so I lived a little bit of everywhere. But it was always a very important part of my family to be going to church, to be involved in church. And growing into adulthood, I was living in the Southeast. I was living in Georgia, and had moved here from Georgia within the last 5 or 6 years. It'll be 6 years come this spring. And one thing that I noticed growing up in a church and always being part of a faith community was I was somewhat isolated. Everybody I talked to was a church member, had grown up in church, had exposure going to church. And something that I noticed when I moved here was it was a little different. It was just a little different to be part of a church community, something that I had grown up in, something that was very important to me. So how was that different, you might ask? So having part of my adult life in the Southeast, it was a normal part of everybody's life to go to church. You didn't even have to ask somebody. It was just very normal. Sunday mornings, everybody goes to church. So when I moved to Madison, it was different. And it was surprising to me. Frankly, it was surprising because I hadn't been exposed to that. So what was also the other part of it that was wonderful is everybody who was coming is intentionally coming. Everybody who was coming to church was making a conscious effort to be searching for food, searching to be filled. And I think there's something really wonderful about that. And that's something that I noticed when I came here to CPC, and 5-6 years later, I'm still here, part of this community. So I think that really spoke to me in terms of how I share my faith, because I discovered that it was harder. It was harder moving to an area where going to church was a little bit more of an exception, and so talking about it was harder. And so what I found myself doing was looking at ways that I can tell people without being intimidating, without coming to them and being like, well, do you go to church? What do you do on Sundays? So I found the best way for me to do that was to share about myself, share what I was doing and open myself up so people could ask me questions. A good example of that is at work. At work, I had gotten accustomed to talking to my coworkers on Fridays. What are you doing this weekend? What does your regular schedule look like? And that always gave me the opportunity to, well, on Sunday I'm going to church. Well, on Sunday afternoon we're throwing a community event at my church. And in regular conversation, it became a way for me to tell people how I identify as a Christian. And it seems almost trivial to say, oh, my regular Sunday morning or a community event that the church is throwing is something I'm participating in. But it over time, it got to the point where people were identifying with me as a Christian because they knew that's what I was doing. I had the opportunity for people to ask me, well, why are you doing that? Why are you a member of the church? Why are you opening up the community or the church doors to the community? It's what God asked me to do. It's what God calls us to do. Calls us to be light. Calls us to be seasoning. And I love, one of the things I really love about the way this is written is also that I believe in food. I said that 2 weeks ago, if you heard me at the congregational meeting. I believe in food. I believe in sharing food with people. And having been a member here at Christ Presbyterian Church, and then being able to have an opportunity to get plugged into some of our mission partners, such as Pres House, I've had the opportunity at Pres House to serve 100+ apartment residents who are a very diverse crowd. Some of them are churchgoers, some of them are not, some of them are believers, some of them are not. But what it says for Pres House to be offering a community space, for us to be able to give into that and offer people food so they can grow together and have conversation together, is my way of being seasoning, is my way of being a light. And then that also leads to an opportunity of me being able to talk about it with other individuals, which I think is wonderful. A good example of what this eventually moved into, being able to talk about what I do on the weekends or regularly going to church, is I had a coworker come to me. We're on a work trip, and we were staying in an apartment together, and she came to me and was like, "Laura, can you talk to me about your faith? I know you go to church. I know we might have some different views, but can you just talk to me about it?" And it was wonderful because we ended up sitting on the couch for 3 hours talking about what our faith is, what our faith means to us, and why we're the people we are. And it was a really awesome opportunity for her to ask me questions, for me to ask her questions, also where she is in her faith journey. So as part of that, I really, I think my major takeaway from a lot of this is, it's not easy to share your faith, but you have to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere that is tangible. That doesn't mean, going up to strangers and sharing your faith. That means connecting with people who are already connected with you. And then God will work his magic in starting to grow yourself as a light, as seasoning within your community, whether it be work, family, or other people you meet. So right now, I'm going to hand it over to Angie. She's going to share a little bit also, and then as I mentioned, we're going to give you guys the opportunity to respond.
Thanks. Yeah, we thought it'd be really useful for you to hear kind of stories from both Laura and I. We both have, there's definitely some similarities and some pretty big differences in our stories and also in our approach to sharing faith. And so my story, I grew up about an hour away from here. Also grew up in the church. My family was very active in church. And we talked a lot about church, and we did not talk a lot about faith. And I would say my parents would probably still have a hard time defining what their faith actually is. And that's something where, as I was a teenager, became a teenager, and was trying to, asking a lot of questions and having a lot of doubts, and honestly trying to reconcile my deeply held faith with my growing understanding and beliefs about the world. I didn't find people who could talk with me about that. And I actually ended up leaving the church when I was in college, and spent most of my adult life in very secular environments. I'm a scientist. I was in academia for a very long time. So Laura talked about the difference with the South. I lived on the West Coast and in Massachusetts for most of my adult life. Those are very, even church plays an even smaller role in those places than it does in Madison. And like in grad school, I knew one grad student who went to church, and he was great, but that was one person I knew. And so it just wasn't a big part of the life I saw there. And where I saw the church, I feel like where the church comes up in a lot of public discourse is not things I admire. It's, creationism, anti-abortionism, things I didn't like, but I also knew in the back of my head and in my heart that I had this wonderful experience in church growing up, and I always kind of thought about going back. So I did, 8-10 years ago, I was actually in DC at the time. I did go to church and start going to church again, found a wonderful church there. By that point, I'd realized that there were church communities out there that could engage in honest doubts and thoughts and questioning and could help you grow through that. And I did find a wonderful community there. But it was hard for me to talk about it. I wasn't in academia at the time. I was working for EPA. In DC, the church is a larger part of life in DC, of many people's lives in DC, but it was still hard for me to talk about it. As a church and as my faith kind of became an increasingly important part of my life, it was harder to not talk about it, and I felt more and more dishonest not talking about it. So I remember the first time I mentioned something I did at church to someone at work, and I remember being very embarrassed and thinking, oh, they're gonna, I guess I was scared to talk about it because I thought, I was worried what they'd think about me. I was worried that they'd identify me with the Christian right. I was worried they'd think I was like just the mindless sheep who did what you're told and doesn't question, and all these other things. And I remember just mentioning something I was doing at church, and I think they were like, "Oh yeah, my church does this too," and it was so not the reaction I was expecting. It was very encouraging, which obviously doesn't happen all the time. But I was kind of just realizing that for me to be authentic, and for me to really share who I am with people, and to really develop strong relationships with people, I needed to be honest about that, as well as obeying the call as Christians, which we have, to share our faith. And so, I mean, when I was thinking about doing this talk, I was kind of thinking about why do I share my faith? Why would I? And part of it is for myself, that I feel like that's me being genuine, and that's me reaching out to people. There's also the hope that in trying to present an honest, doubt-filled, questioning faith and belief system with non-believers, you're presenting a counterexample to a lot of the narrative of Christianity out there. And also by presenting things you're doing, I feel like there's this one narrative of what Christianity is in this country right now. And I think it's really valuable to present counterexamples to that. Also, just in talking with people, other Christians, I'm deepening my faith, I'm questioning my faith, I'm developing my faith, and I think the same thing can happen with them too. So it's really good for the community. And of course, it's what we're called to do by God. We're called to be that light on. I love the image of the light on the hill. I'll say David Straight actually turned me on to this interpretation of this scripture, so which I think is really, really lovely. And thinking about how I share my faith, it's still easier for me to talk about events and talk about what I do rather than talking about real faith. That's probably an area where it'd be really good for me to work on. And I think some of that does come from my family. Like I said, my family, we went to church all the time. My parents are still very active in that church. But in actually talking about deeply held beliefs, that's, and the nitty-gritty of it, that's still hard for me to do. But it's easier for me to talk about, oh, I'm playing in church. Oh, I have this event. We had a book discussion on Sunday night, and various other things. And honestly, it's easiest for me to talk about things with refuge and refuge events. And that's part of that is because I'm really passionate about that. It also is very deeply rooted in my faith, so it's easy. It's actually easier for me to talk in that case about how that ties to my faith. And I like doing it too because I feel like it is presenting a counter narrative to a lot of what's out there about Christianity today as well. So with that, as Laura said, we have 3 questions for you, which are basically, why do you share your faith, or why would you like to share your faith? What's hard about it? And then, what have you learned that helps you share your faith? So we have these up here, very simple questions. So maybe just take like 10, 15 seconds, just take a little bit of time to think about it, and then we'll invite you to offer your thoughts. Laura and I have obviously shared some of our thoughts on this already with you. Does anyone want to jump in with thoughts? Yeah.
Alexandra, sharing my faith with others is because I would like others to experience the joy I feel from my own faith. And specifically for me, I haven't done very well at all with my own adult children, may I add. So I'm working on the grandkids. And actually, I have my oldest of 9 is a freshman in college, and I've had some opportunities to talk to her. And I notice now that in family gatherings, if she's there, she will say, "How about Grandma could say a prayer?" No one else is going to ask me to put you in on that. But I'm sharing my faith with her because, as I said, I've not done well with my own three, and they're way grown up. But I'm starting on the next generation because I want her to have the faith that I have. And also when you say, which is very helpful, to dispel some of these old things, like, well, Grandma, I was never baptized, why not? Which was a little tricky because I couldn't sort of give her the straight answer, which I know sort of what the story was, because I didn't want to offend her mom and her, anyway. But I said, you can be baptized today. We can do that today, to which I'm thinking, oh, my phone's going to ring soon. But I feel as she's 18 years old, and I feel that really I feel called upon to do that for her.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I had an opportunity here at Faith, not Faith Cafe, the Friday night. Yes, English is a second language. One of the folks from, I guess she was from China, she said, why do you do this? What's in it for you? Which opened the door for me to say, our God commands us to do this. We have to do it. We're commanded to do it. But those don't come along very often. And I'm really, really shy about buttonholing people. I think it's got to be a natural evolution of your relationship with someone else. You don't just go up on the sidewalk and start telling somebody about your faith. So I think it has to be natural. I think it has to be at ease. I think it has to be with trust and mutual regard.
I think that is a beautiful point. Beautiful, beautiful point. And I think it also speaks into who we are as Christians and how Christians are perceived very often is to be able to build a genuine relationship with somebody to where you're just telling them your heart and it doesn't feel, they're not going to feel like you have some ulterior motive. They're going to want to listen to you because they love you and trust you. And then also you have the opportunity to listen to them, so it feels very, it's mutual. It is friends talking to one another, loved ones talking to one another. So I love that point.
She wanted to add one thing which I'd actually meant to say, which was, and this is actually partly of a conversation I had with Barry, which is, to me, it's also about sharing without an expectation of an outcome. You're sharing because that's who you are, and you're sharing who you are, and you're sharing your beliefs, and you're not sharing with any expectation of the impact it's going to have on that person, that it's going to convert them, and they're going to see the light. And it's really, you're sharing because that's who you are, and maybe you're preparing something in their life, and maybe you're not, but not having any expectation of what it's going to do with them and what they're going to do following it. So. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget that we were all created as spiritual people, and while there's a lot of antipathy about organized religion, surveys constantly show that people are very interested in spirituality. And so I think that when we ignore that aspect of our personhood, as you said, we're ignoring a whole part, and I think often we're surprised how other people are interested in spiritual topics, maybe not as interested in organized religion, but they're very interested in spiritual things. And so I think that opens a door and also, compels us to be able to engage with people in an aspect of their personality that's part of everyone and can't be ignored, shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah, and I think it's also can be really valuable if someone has a view. I mean, a lot of people were hurt by religion and by their experiences with the church, and if you can kind of show that there might be a different way to be a Christian or go to church, and that it might, maybe it would get not the expectation, but there might be a chance that you could be opening a door for them to come back and find a way to develop their spirituality in a unlike the way they were hurt, however that was.
There are a lot of questions in my life that I have had the same kinds of questions for a long time, and I expect to still have those questions. And I'm actually comfortable with that, and it doesn't make me uncomfortable. And so for that reason, I feel pretty at ease to talk with people about faith, because it doesn't have, these are all the answers, and it's all buttoned down, and there's no ambiguity. Like, there actually is ambiguity, and that's even studying Scripture. There's a lot of ambiguity in Scripture about principles. So, and I don't feel embarrassed about my faith, because if there are things that I actually truly feel embarrassed about, those probably are not things I'm going to hold on to as points of faith. And so it's kind of I feel comfortable in relationship when there's trust, talking with people about that faith. And also, I just think everybody has faith. Everybody makes these choices and assumptions, and you're not in the same place after 5 or 10 years. We're on this journey of having, hopefully, increasing understanding about some things, and then making choices of faith based on assumptions and based on cumulative sort of learning and experience.
And there's another thought back there.
I do quite a bit of travelling, and apart from the fact that I do very much like reading at work, just when it arises, you drop the fact that you're going to church. But very often the travellers will have earbuds in and they're just listening to the news. But every now and again somebody wants to talk. And I find the best thing is, as you're moving, if they're saying anything that gives you some indication of a little bit of a different consciousness than just the everyday stuff, often I say, so do you follow a particular faith? And I ask them about them. That's the introduction. And then eventually they'll turn around and usually say, so what about you? And I actually, following up on what you do, I'm a member of a Presbyterian church back where I belong in Texas. And we have actually got a Sunday school class that deals with those questions we always wanted to ask. It's fairly new, it's grown like crazy, because there are so many people in the church who do have questions. As they mature, but they're all older, mostly older people who are maturing, and some of those things that we say so flippant, not so flippantly, but lightly, because it's routine, are questioned a little bit. And so I do find that the best way for me is to question them about what do they believe. And sometimes it was a fascinating one, the last one, was someone from the very southern part of South America who said his wife at the moment was actually busy being a witch. And I thought, did I hear that right? And he said, yes, he said, a good witch. And I thought, there was a lot of, they're Catholic, in basically, a lot of superstition with it that's still not very developed. But it was about the red moon. It was the time of the red moon, just recently. So it was fascinating to hear what he believed, because of course many of the beliefs are aligned with what our Christian belief might be, except in some areas it was just a little bit off on margins. So it's the asking of the question about what they believe that is the way I do it.
I think that's a really beautiful way and an awesome lesson for us to learn. It's just that question, like to ask somebody about their faith, to open up the conversation. It's quite validating in a relationship to be like, I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen to what you have to say because I want to share something with you too. And I think sometimes that is a perception that people miss, or it's an opinion of Christians, is that we're just going to tell people what we believe without listening or hearing questions that people have. So I think that's
one additional thing, and that's very much because I'm from England and we don't talk about faith at all. We all assume that we're all CLE, we're all Church of England, most of us baptized, we very often get married in church and we get buried in church. And it's very sad to me. There are some people who have more faith, and many of them my friends. But when you say to me, when someone comes up to me and says, I'm a Christian, it's immediately all the red flags go up. Because they are going to be almost definitely Christian right, most of the time, and with holding to very strong opinions on things that have become politicized, especially here in America at the moment, as that divide is unbelievable. You can hardly have a normal conversation. You've got to be so careful what you say to women. But so the phrase "I am a Christian" is something that I can never feel I want to say. I am a Christian. I follow the Christian way. But am I the same churchgoer you are? I may not be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that really leads really nicely to our next question of when have you found it difficult to share your faith and why? And I think some of that is exactly the things you're talking about. That. Rebecca?
The one is the politicize and environment. We have extreme right and left, and sometimes we have middle. But what I really find hard about sharing my faith is sometimes I feel like I'm forcing my beliefs on someone who I don't want to force. I don't want to come across as someone who's like, you have to come. Even though I have invited people, but I make it clear, you're welcome to come, and I'd be ecstatic if you could, not ecstatic, but I'm not requiring people because they have to make that conscious effort. But that's one thing that I have a hard time with. And, growing up, I grew up in the Presbyterian church. Not this one, but definitely. And a mother who didn't talk to her family very often, very close. So, sharing anything personal outside the house is such a struggle for me because, in a roundabout way, I was taught anything that happens in the house is the house. We do not talk about that. We do not. And it's very hard for me to share my faith, but sometimes I do when it's a fundraiser because everybody can get around fundraisers.
Yeah.
Everybody can get food. But when you get down to what I believe, I've had some negative responses from people who are way too far on the right with mine. And I know they've had the same thing with me, so I try to avoid that because I don't want to interfere with their faith, but I also don't want to feel like I'm put down. So it's very hard.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I know that I struggle with that too. I think you just have to offer. Thinking about your first comment, I think for me it's offering, and I don't have an expectation that they come, and I don't have an expectation they believe what I believe, and if they think I do, I sort of have to, shrug off. Yeah.
Yeah, what it becomes a challenge, I think sometimes is, I'll have to qualify for the mass here. It's different here versus other places I've been. And working with the university and the people that I deal with even out in the community are connected. People want to intellectualize any conversation. And it comes preloaded when you say that I'm a Christian. People, you have to deconstruct, or either it takes longer to just communicate what you're doing, where your values are, because I'll be in an environment, they'll say, well, what are your values? And I'll say, well, they're spiritually grounded. There's this tension in the room, and you have to help them understand the vocabulary sometimes. That makes it hard. Other times, if I have to give a bio of myself, for example, and I let them know that the things I'm interested in really are, my foundation is spirituality. I say that without apology now. And I let people's interaction with me dictate how does that live without trying to convert her anyway. But when I have to give credit to where credit comes from. When someone says, where do you get this from? It's not my education per se. I'm doing what I'm doing because of my spirit led me there, my training, my grounding, my sense of community, my reinforcement. So it's a challenge, but I don't avoid it. And I trust that the quality of my interactions, or if I'm presenting, will be an example of what that looks like. So I don't know if you heard it the way I did.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I also just want to echo what Roland just said, especially with what, with the work that I do and how people perceive me. I work with a lot of higher education institutions here at the university, MNTC, and we talk about what we do and how we want to welcome internationals and help them to feel at home here. But sometimes it's very difficult for people just seeing me there as a member of Christ Presbyterian Church or a program of Christ Presbyterian Church. It's a religious program. It's a faith-based program. And so they already have a cliche of me when I get there. And sometimes it makes it harder for me. I mean, I have to, say, hey, Ned, I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not here to push, the religious, side of me, of my faith, my belief. I'm here to offer a service. Even though that service, was prompted by my faith or by the faith of the organization that I represent. It's because we're Christian and, our faith call us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And we want to extend that God's love to internationals who live in our community. So it's sometimes, there's that tension, as she was saying, when you go out there in the community trying to, talk about what you do or promote the service that we provide through the ministry or the organization. You always have that tension, and sometimes it makes you feel uncomfortable.
I think that's a really wonderful point too. Is why going back to why the international partners, like why does John Renee feel called to do that, and to share God's love is wonderful. And I think that a lot of the comments we're talking about is it is hard to say I'm a Christian, but it's easier to build that relationship first to where somebody has the opportunity to say why. It is because of my faith. It's because of my spiritual beliefs, and then you can move on from there into it. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, that's 1 minute. How many time? Okay. 1 minute. 1 minute for a 5-minute warning and 1 minute.
I think you lower the 5-minute warning.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay. So I think we've actually already talked a lot about some of what's helped us doing this, and so I think we'll kind of just leave that as a thought for you guys to think about and take home. And we'll just try to end by returning to the scripture. And just reminding ourselves again about, we're called to be salt, to bring out the God flavors of this earth. And I think my favorite part is, putting on a light stand. Now to put you there on a hilltop and a light stand, shine, keep open house, be generous with your lives. I mean, I love that idea of being generous with our lives. And that's what we're called to do as Christians. And part of that is sharing our faith, not hiding under the bushel is what I always think of from the song, but not hiding it, really sharing it as genuinely as we can, as openly as we can, and without expectation. So thank you all for coming. Any last thoughts?
I just have one. It's just kind of a funny note to leave you guys on. Is Angie and I were having this conversation out in the gathering hall last week, and Aaron Considine, who, if you don't know Aaron Considine, you should know him. You should have a personal relationship with Aaron Considine. He has some wonderful little nuggets of things. And so I turned to him and asked him and said, what can you tell us about sharing your faith? And he goes, sometimes I have the opportunity to share my faith because of scheduling conflicts, because of things that are happening at the church. And it was so funny to me because he hasn't been able to go do other things because he's had a commitment here or he's been involved in something here. So it is my encouragement to give you the opportunity to be involved, to meet with other people here within CPC, join a community, be part of it, and then it's an awesome way to meet other people, and then you have scheduling conflicts. And then you can talk about it when people invite you to things. So it was a very funny little note that Aaron left us on, so I wanted to share that with you guys.
Okay, so I hand it over to Andrea, who will wrap up things up.
Thank you so much, Laura. So I'm going to pray here in a minute and then also share a little bit more about what's next for Faith Cafe coming up. So would you pray with me now? Oh God, we thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given to us to be in relationship with one another here and with people outside this room as well. I pray that you would help us to open up ourselves so that others might then be prompted to open up to you. Help us to share you genuinely, to share our reaction to you, and also to invite conversation from others and the doubts and the struggles and the questions as well as the deep faith that we might find. So go with us this week as we endeavor to reflect you and to be you in the world. Amen. So you can see next week we'll switch it up a little bit, and the youth will be doing a talent show for us in this space. So come here and listen to the voices and the talents of the youth in our church. And you can see we have several topics coming up, and I want to highlight especially the March 3rd, Doubt and Questioning. I'll be leading that, talking about doubt, what that looks like, and questions that came up a lot in the conversation today around where do we hold these questions, or how do we sit with the doubt that we might have, and recognizing that that is actually a way to deepen faith. And so I'd encourage you to think about that over the next few weeks. Contact me if you have stories or questions that you would like to share during that time, or you'd like to kind of deepen the conversation that we have on that day. So as I said last week, glad you're here, and I encourage you to invite a friend to join you as you come to Faith Cafes in the future. So, great day.